Prior to the Thousand Year Blood War arc, Captain Commander Shigekuni Genryuusai Yamamoto has always been depicted as a staunch defender and symbol of everything the Gotei 13 stands for. An unshakable icon of authoritarian power, Yamamoto reflects both the most traditionally held values of the Soul Society and also its more progressive nature after having been exposed to Ichigo Kurosaki. Either way, since his introduction into the Bleach story, Yamamoto has always been this revered and highly respected leader who has led the Gotei 13 for over 1,000 years. And yet, at the start of the final arc of Bleach, something so terrible happens, so tragic, that it transforms the Captain Commander forever and begins what would be a very sharp descent to his eventual downfall. In today's video, there will of course be spoilers for the final arc of Bleach as we dive into the character development that culminated into the eventual downfall of the Captain Commander of the Gotei 13. Before we begin, however, guys, if you haven't hit subscribe yet, make sure to do that now. We're edging closer to 70,000 subs, which is just amazing, and I would really appreciate your support. So if you hit that button, you'll get Bleach content like this every single week. Also, don't forget to give the video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, because it really does help with exposure across YouTube and helping to make sure more people get to see it. And if you want to take that support from me a little step further, we do now have a Patreon for the channel as well, where you can support me there for as little as $1 a month, and I would really appreciate it. And of course, a massive thank you goes out to everyone who has become a patron so far. Now, up until now, Yamamoto's characterization has remained pretty steadfast. He is a stalwart defender of the Gotei 13. In the Soul Society arc, he's introduced as being very traditionalist, very much on the side of the law, very willing to just prosecute Rukia Kuchiki without a second thought, not willing to question the supposed judiciary powers of the Central 46, because that is Yamamoto's character. He is the Soul Society. He embodies the Gotei 13 and its military might in perhaps the most staunch way possible. Now, in many ways, Soul Society arc Yamamoto is Yamamoto in his purest form. He's obviously not the same ruthless thug he was 1,000 years ago, but he's matured and developed into still a pretty stern leader of the Gotei 13, willing and ready to enforce its laws at the first moment. But of course, Yamamoto would undergo a slight change after having been introduced to Ichigo Kurosaki and the Ryoka, and working alongside them to take on Aizen during the war with the Ironclads. Now, having lived for over a millennia, any kind of character development for Yamamoto would feel forced if it had such a dramatic impact on him in such a short amount of time. This guy has lived through it all. He probably has seen it all as well. So for him to really just immediately become a totally new person after having met Ichigo and in some ways having his eyes opened would be unrealistic. But Yamamoto's character development is handled pretty well, I would say, throughout. It's subtle, it's small, but it is there, and it is remarked upon by a number of characters throughout the story. Yamamoto overall becomes more lenient, allows characters like the Vizard to return to Soul Society, removes the banishment he had on Kisuke Urahara and Yoruichi Shihoin. Characters like that can now come and go freely as they please, because Yamamoto has mellowed out in some ways. After the deception of Aizen, revealing the truth behind the Central 46, and in some ways, I suppose, smashing the illusion many people had about the current state of the Soul Society, Yamamoto has changed ever so slightly to meet the times. Now, of course, Yamamoto still embodies that crotchety grandfather trope in the story where he still admonishes characters who are younger than him, who's just about every single character there is, including characters like Kyoraku and Ukitake, to whom he is a father figure. But he really has changed in a number of ways. You know, he actually actively helps out the vice captains against Ion in the Fate Karakura Town arc, giving them simply a light chiding about how he's a little disappointed he's had to step in, but regardless, he has their backs. And this kind of change in Yamamoto grows and exemplifies as we move through the Aizen fight, Obviously, the Vizards show up, they have a pretty cordial meeting, and they realise that they are actually allies, which then leads to Yamamoto reinstating them. What I always found to be fascinating about Yamamoto was that kind of clash between the more progressive ideals of the younger generation and him still being rooted in some of his older ways. For example, he sacrifices his arm to use the Hado Ito Kaso against Aizen, and then doesn't want to have Orihime heal him again, presumably out of some kind of concern of involving the humans, but also maybe even appearing weak himself, very much a traditionally held belief. And then, of course, Yamamoto's biggest change really up until the Thousand Year Blood War arc is exemplified in the Lost Agent arc, where he works with Urahara to get Ichigo's powers back, actively breaking the law of the Soul Society to give a human Shinigami powers again, clearly believing that they owe Ichigo a massive debt, which they did, and Yamamoto actually honoured it, which I always thought was a really nice moment for his character, him basically saying, if we didn't help Ichigo now in his moment of need, it would bring great eternal shame to the Gotei 13. And I think he's absolutely right, and I think it was definitely the right thing to do as a leader. So we've very quickly explored Yamamoto's character trajectory throughout the first 3 major arcs of Bleach, and he doesn't change too much. He kind of mellows out slightly as the story goes on. The big changes for Yamamoto, and what we're really going to look at in this video, however, happen in the Thousand Year Blood War, and Yamamoto's not around in this arc for very long, due to him being brutally killed off. However, he experiences some of the most important character development he ever has in the story during this section of the arc. As I've mentioned on this channel before, the Thousand Year Blood War arc has many themes, and one of the biggest is digging up old bones and old secrets, and there aren't many older characters than Yamamoto, and his closet is filled with a number of skeletons, perhaps the biggest one being a Quincy king by the name of Yhwach, who now comes back to haunt him. What I absolutely love about the start of this arc, I love many things about the start of this arc, to be fair. I think Kubo is pretty much on the ball right the way from chapter 480 all the way through to somewhere in Second Invasion, and Yamamoto is a recipient of that great writing. And you really see him change and suffer the consequences of this new, slightly more progressive Yamamoto that we saw in the Lost Agent arc. And it's a dramatic change, and it's a believable change, and one that really helps to humanise the character overall, I think. So you have to remember that prior to this arc, Yamamoto really has been depicted as this guy who can just walk into a fight, end it in a single swing, and really he's remained above most conflicts, and he kind of is presented as the figurehead of the Gotei 13. Things get very intimate and personal with Yamamoto in the Thousand Year Blood War arc. However, right at the start of the arc, the enemy breaks into his office, the Vandenreich declare war on him, and they do so by brutally impaling his vice captain Sasakibe Chojiro into his office wall with a massive javelin. It's a great scene that completely blew my mind when I first saw it. Sasakibe is down somewhere miles away fighting Driscoll Bursey, who impales him with his huge javelin, and he goes flying through the Soul Society and happens to land in Yamamoto's office. Obviously that's pretty lucky. It's done in a very cinematic way, which I don't mind that at all. I think it works well. I can't wait to see it in the anime because I think it's going to be a dramatic moment. But Sasakibe is just impaled into Yamamoto's wall, and then the Vandenreich leave, and Sasakibe is killed here, which I think a lot of people were genuinely really surprised about. Chojiro has always been given a bad rap in Bleach, but for him to actually die signaled a immediately different tone for the final arc. Kubo wasn't messing around. And unfortunately, Yamamoto is the first recipient of this, and he immediately begins to change. Now, one thing we didn't really know prior to this arc, and it is kind of posthumous storytelling in a way, most of Sasakibe's development happens after he dies, but that development directly impacts Yamamoto as well and contributes to his eventual downfall. Now, when I say downfall in the title of this video, I'm actually talking about an amalgamation of different factors. Yamamoto's literal downfall, his obvious death, but also his political downfall as well, and the way his character changes to incorporate this difference. Sasakibe and Yamamoto turn out that they've actually been very close, and it makes a lot of sense. Sasakibe has essentially been his right-hand man for over 1,000 years, and for suddenly him to not be there anymore, to be taken away from Yamamoto and the Soul Society in such a sudden and brutal way, obviously really hurts Yamamoto, and it offers us a glimpse into this character who isn't just this soldier who can stand firm. He's actually a real human being. After Sasakibe is killed, we get this really moving scene, which in my opinion signals the change in Yamamoto that would afflict him until his death, where we get a funeral scene for Sasakibe, and he's burnt atop this pyre as Byakuya reads out a eulogy. And it's a sobering moment, because we've never seen anything like this in the series before. No good guy has actually died yet in the present timeline. And Byakuya kind of mentions to Renji as they watch Sasakibe's body be lowered onto the wood, he says, us peons, we couldn't possibly imagine the pain that the Captain Commander is currently experiencing. And of course he's right. You know, no one has known Yamamoto for this amount of time. If Yamamoto has a best friend, Chojuro is the closest thing to it. And yeah, there's just this incredible drawing of Yama that just is an amazing example of showing and not telling, which is just a wonderful writing, where he just looks destroyed. You know, he looks absolutely destroyed. And, you know, you have to put yourself in Yamamoto's shoes. Everything's been going pretty swimmingly up until now, then suddenly out of nowhere, the Quincy show up in Soul Society, Chojuro is immediately killed, along with 100 other officers, and you as the Captain Commander, the buck stops with you. Not only have you let down 100 Shinigami, you've let down your best friend as well, because he's ultimately responsible for the Gotei 13. And not only that, but the enemy that has waged war on you, you've got a pretty good suspicion that you know who's causing this, who's behind it. And Yamamoto simply says, light the pyre, with this terrible look on his face. He just looks absolutely distraught as Sasakibe's body is burned. And, you know, that's quite symbolic as well. Yamamoto's all about using flames, and to watch flames just consume Chojuro is pretty difficult for him. And it's my belief that Yamamoto is never the same again. Now, of course, he doesn't live for much longer after this point, but it's crucial to see Yamamoto's change in character development here. After this, we have a typical captain's meeting, except it's not typical. The air is very different. Yamamoto is a totally different leader now to how he has been previously, throwing all caution to the wind. And you get this great moment where Mayuri and Akon are giving a report on the Vandenreich soldiers who invaded, the amount of damage that was done, and Yamamoto just instantly interrupts Mayuri midway through his speech, basically being like, I've heard, that's enough. Be quiet. I don't care about any of this. Where is the enemy base? Yamamoto's mind is preoccupied with only one thing: invading the enemy base and exacting a bloody vengeance on the people who murdered Sasakibe. And it's just phenomenally well drawn. Mayuri, of all characters, and this is why Mayuri was used, I think, is uncomfortable. You know, he looks at Yama and he's just like, I don't know what to tell you. We don't know yet. I don't have that information yet. I'm sorry. And Yama just looks so menacing. He looks evil, and I think this is probably a small window into the man he once was 1,000 years ago. His eyes just looking at Mayuri like, you will tell me everything you know now, or I will probably just burn this place to the ground. And Mayuri's like, we don't have that information yet. And it's like, Mayuri of all these characters is so brash, so loud, and here he's just like turned into a mouse in front of Yamamoto. And you can tell there's an awkward feeling in the air. And Kubo is just on a roll here with showing and not telling. Yamamoto, it's very much Yamamoto's trademark thing when he gives an order in a captain's meeting to slam his cane on the ground. That's the signal that he's giving an order. And Kubo just shows that the cane doesn't move. It just remains on the floor, and you can see it. You can play it in your head how this scene goes. When Mayuri delivers the news that they don't know where the Vandenreich headquarters are, Yamamoto, you can just imagine him standing there like just everyone quiet, waiting for Yamamoto to say something else, and he's just like, I see. Like, you know, just the serious rage. This is no longer the same man who, you know, helped out Ichigo in the Lost Agent arc. This is now a guy who's out for blood. And he just basically says, we cannot let these cowards get the better of us again. Prepare for war. And Yamamoto is just, you know, immediately out for blood. And so already here we're seeing a change in his leadership. We're seeing that he's no longer the sort of calm, no longer composed. You know, he's interrupting his officers. He's not giving out normal orders. He's making the whole situation feel kind of awkward. And this is exacerbated by his conversation with Mayuri when they get a chance to be alone. And I think that this scene was put in here by Kubo to do multiple things. Obviously, it's to drop the major plot revelation that Yamamoto knew Yuha Bark from 1,000 years ago, but on a slightly more subtle level, this point is included here to show that people are losing faith in Yamamoto, that his leadership is starting to slip. Because, you know, Yama's been around for 1,000 years, at least. The man is at the top of his game. He knows how to run the Gotei 13. Yet when he gets Mayuri aside, he's like, you know, how did this happen? When he talks about the disappearing souls in Rukongai, he's like, what's going on here? You know, why didn't you tell me? And Kubo purposefully doesn't show you Yama's face during pretty much any of this scene. And you can tell that Mayuri's kind of been summoned there, and Mayuri's like, you know, well, it's not really my fault. We detected that the worlds were shifting, so, you know, yeah, we sacrificed all these Rukon citizens because it was an emergency situation. And Yamamoto's like, well, you know, if it was an emergency, you know, you would have been given it. You would have been given permission. And Mayuri's like, yeah, okay. And then Yamamoto actually tries to put the blame on him, which is not something you've necessarily seen Yamamoto do in the past. He basically turns around and says, if the research and development division had actually done their job, you know, we might have been able to catch this earlier. And it's at this point where Mayuri snaps, and he actually talks back to Yamamoto in what is one of the most brazen displays of essentially insubordination we've seen post-Soul Society Civil War, that really shows that some confidence in Yamamoto is slipping, because Mayuri is actually right here as well. Mayuri says that is absolutely not true. You are the one. I came to you after the Soul Society fight to tell you about Uryu Ishida, and that if he still existed, there's a great chance the Vandenreich existed still as well. The Quincy were not dead. And you brushed it off as being something that we didn't need to worry about, and now these people are dead because of you, because you failed to kill Yuha Bark 1,000 years ago. And you see just the profile of Yamamoto's face, and everything Mayuri is saying is true. Yamamoto dropped the ball and is now trying to blame it on somebody else. That's not a thing a leader does, certainly not a leader who has been around and is so revered as Yamamoto, but he's losing his edge. Ever since Sasakibe died, Yamamoto has been on a downward spiral. And it is kind of sad to see, but like I said, it really humanizes the character. Everyone can make mistakes. Yamamoto's not a robot. He's not a statuesque leader after all. Now that his biggest vulnerability has been exposed, he's starting to slip up and lose the respect of some of his closest confidants. And I just love this scene. I remember reading it and I was like, this is a great conversation that's so thrilling. Thrilling to see Yamamoto try and place blame for something somewhere else, and Mayuri basically be like, you are wrong. This is your fault, not mine. Don't blame this on me. And I just love that. I think it's so good, and it's such a big indicator that Yamamoto is losing his grip. Big time. Now, unfortunately, we don't get to see too much more of this because the Vandenreich invades again quite quickly. However, Yamamoto does showcase a new recklessness here. As soon as the Vandenreich invade, Yamamoto is like, I'm going out there. And while you can maybe believe that, yes, this is probably down to him wanting to protect the Soul Society, definitely the ulterior motive is to find Yhwach as quickly as possible and instantly exact revenge. And of course, Yamamoto arrives at the battlefield with Driscoll Bursey to save Hisagi, and what I'm kind of assuming here is Yamamoto can tell who killed Sasakibe somehow. Maybe he recognised the massive javelin, perhaps, even though that must have been a split-second decision. But clearly Yamamoto arrives on the battlefield because it seems like it would be way too much of a coincidence for him to arrive to just save Hisagi and, oh, you're happening to fight the guy who killed Sasakibe. Although Yamamoto is, genuinely shocked when Driscoll pulls out Sasakibe's Bankai. But we do get, a wonderful flashback from this fight where we actually get some insight into a slightly younger Yamamoto and his earlier days with Sasakibe. Sasakibe is the reason he got the nickname Genryuusai, and he played a huge role in both of their developments, and it's a really nice flashback, actually. And one thing that's crucial about the Thousand Year Blood War arc, again, this idea of it paying special attention to the older generation of captains, we get flashbacks. For most of them, Ukitake gets basically nothing, because out of the four of them, he is the one who is given the least. But Yamamoto gets a nice flashback here, dating back to literally some of the oldest times we've seen in the story. And it's just really good to get this idea of his relationship with Sasakibe and why he is in this mental place he is now. Why he feels, so lost. And obviously he just obliterates Driscoll in a single move. It's a great moment. Driscoll's just charred to the bone, and then even his bones disintegrate. And Yamamoto says to Hisagi, don't worry, I will obliterate this enemy army immediately. And he just races across the battlefield, seeks out Yhwach, and basically says, I will kill you. And you don't have to look far to realise how different the characterisation here is for Yamamoto. When Yamamoto was going up against Aizen at the climax of the Fate Karakura Town fight, there was still very much that idea of the crotchety old grandfather. He grabs Aizen's arm and he says, you're an upstart, you're a jumped up upstart who thinks he's good enough to take on the Soul Society, saying things like, you're so naive, you punk. Still very much the same Yamamoto that we've known all this time. He's taking the fight seriously, he sacrifices his arm just to use Ito Kasso, but he's still very much, for the most part, composed, wise, he's got all this experience behind him, and he's very much showing that he seems to be, for the most part, in control a lot of the time. This is a very different, frightening Yamamoto who for sure harkens back to his oldest days. He lands on the ground with a massive explosion of fire and he just says, Yhwach, I've come here to kill you. Very simple declaration, similar to the Vandenreich's earlier declaration of war. Yamamoto knows what he wants and he will get it. Almost immediately uses Bankai straight off the bat, Zanka no Tachi, again showing that Yamamoto is maybe not quite in the right space mentally to be dealing with this right now. Instantly going for the kill, but also toying with who he believes to be Yhwach in a very cruel way. Yamamoto kind of shows himself, in some aspect, his true colours, but perhaps the monster that once lurked within. He says things like, oh yeah, without your sword, I guess all you've got is your arrows. All right, well, come on then, I'm going to catch you and kill you either way. And there's terrifying images of Yamamoto's face, phenomenal artwork in this fight with who he believes to be Yhwach. And Yamamoto is just chasing him down. The whole time he's basically just chasing him down like a predator to its prey. And with his Bankai active, he's completely unstoppable and he's just attacking what he believes to be Yhwach with prejudice. Desperate to just kill him, but also torture him at the same time. And Yhwach starts screaming things at him like, you can possibly know what it means, to be the Quincy, essentially. And Yamamoto's like, I don't care. Nothing you say can make up for the screams of the Shinigami you have murdered with your invasion. And so because of that, I'm just going to annihilate you without really listening to reason. And of course, this is all the culmination of Yamamoto's eventual downfall. He exhausts himself by using every ability of his Bankai to just make sure there is nothing left of Yhwach, turning his body to dust. And there's a beautiful picture where the rain starts coming down just as Yamamoto releases his Bankai. All the moisture in the air starts coming down, and he looks like a sad, tired old man. And he has allowed his lust for revenge to completely consume him, turning him into a monster similar to Yhwach in that fight. There's barely any difference between them. Yamamoto could be the villain in that fight. The way he looks and the way he acts and the way he threatens Yhwach and just wants to kill him. And what we're left with is a sad, tired old man with rain running down his face. And then, of course, the cruelest trick of all is revealed that this isn't Yhwach at all, but actually Roidloid Sternritter Y. The real Yhwach devastates the 1st Division barracks and appears in front of Yama. And they have a very brief talk, not a particularly long one, but Yhwach makes light of the fact that he could resurrect, after stealing Yamamoto's Bankai, he could resurrect Yamamoto's own soldiers in the same way Yamamoto took pleasure in the fact that he was resurrecting old Vandenreich victims of his to use against Yhwach. And, it's a great insight into not necessarily Yamamoto's true self, as I said before, but an insight into who he once was. When he's like, why don't you take a close look at those skeletons you're destroying? Because, they're people you know. And it's a pretty sick thing to do, but Yamamoto's not in the right frame of mind anymore. But as we reach the end of Yamamoto's story in the 1,000-Year Blood War arc, we are left with a frail, resigned old man. And Yhwach summons his massive blade from the sky, and it really feels like Yamamoto is ready to accept his judgment, his penance for who he's become, and the mistakes he made 1,000 years ago. Now, of course, we don't ever find out the truth behind their original confrontation, which is a huge shame. But I think you can glean plenty from here. Yamamoto is standing there, his Bankai has been stolen, and he has given up. In that final moment, you can see the resignation on his face, and he's just like, it's over. And I think, we don't know, but I'm assuming his last few thoughts were probably that of regret. Regret that he allowed himself to be so consumed by revenge, that he used up all of his power in a desperate campaign to just murder Yhwach, and in the end it got the better of him. And he is cut down brutally in half, just like his vice captain, killed instantly, nearly. And as Yhwach leaves, Yamamoto sort of lifelessly grabs onto his cloak, but Yhwach is without mercy and just completely shreds the old man to pieces. And it is a sad, fragile end to Yamamoto. It's an end that I would never have anticipated until we started seeing that downward spiral escalate. Yamamoto changes completely after Sasakibe's unexpected death and the declaration of war from an enemy he long thought to be no longer a problem. We see that sadness at the funeral. We see that kind of awkward change in his character in the captain's meeting where everyone is on tenterhooks around him. You can tell. And Mayuri is like getting berated and like, this is not really my fault. And then, of course, that one-on-one conversation with Mayuri later on where Mayuri flat out says to him, how dare you say that about me and my research and development department? It's your fault this has now come to us. These are your sins we're now cleaning up after, is essentially what he's getting at. And Yamamoto has no recourse because he's obviously in the wrong. And it's this really fascinating teardown of Yamamoto's character that Kubo does. And I think Kubo probably got to the 1,000-Year Blood War arc and was like, I want to do something crazy with Yamamoto. I want to change up the way he comes across, change the way people see him, and expose the vulnerabilities in this millennia-old Shinigami, if not older. And yeah, I thought it was really fascinating seeing that downfall and seeing just how Yamamoto changes after the death of his closest friend. And as I'm losing my voice, I think I'll probably end the video there. But I really hope you enjoyed it, guys. Let me know in the comments below what you thought of Yamamoto's quick and sudden and very real spiral into sadness and madness, you know, into that crazed, bloodthirsty monster who just wanted to murder Yhwach, who didn't care about the details, just tell me where I can find them and I will kill them myself. And when he finally does get that chance for vengeance, his rage consumes him and he's got the better of and is killed. So that's it for this video, guys. Let me know in the comments below what you thought of Yamamoto's journey in the 1,000-Year Blood War arc and how it compares to how he was portrayed prior to this arc. I'd love to hear your comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more Bleach content just like this, guys. And until next time, I'll catch you later. I'll see you then.